I warned Julia, if Trent shows up at your birthday party, I'm done. She thought I was bluffing. She was wrong about that, just like she was wrong about a lot of things. My name is Nathan Forrester, and I'm 44 years old. I manage construction projects for a mid-sized firm in Ohio, which means I spend my days dealing with contractors who lie, suppliers who cheat, and budgets that never add up. It's honest work, even if the people around it aren't always honest. I thought my wife was different. I thought Julia was one of the good ones. That was before I found the party planning app on her phone. Special guest, Trent Sawyer, it said, right there in black pixels on her cracked screen. She'd left it open while showering, probably thinking I was too busy watching the game to notice. But I notice everything these days. When your wife starts coming home at 9:30 instead of 6, when she starts taking her phone to the bathroom, when she starts wearing perfume to boring marketing meetings, you learn to pay attention to details. Trent Sawyer, her boss at Morrison Marketing, where Julia works as a senior account manager. 48 years old, drives a red convertible that costs more than I make in 6 months, and has the kind of smile that makes you want to check your wallet afterward. I've met him exactly 3 times at company events, and each time he looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. "Honey," I called toward the bathroom, keeping my voice level, "who's this special guest on your party list?" The water shut off. Silence stretched for about 10 seconds too long. "What list?" Julia's voice carried that careful tone she uses when she's buying time to think. "The one on your phone. Says here you've got Trent marked as a special guest." She appeared in the doorway wrapped in a towel, her dark hair dripping onto her shoulders. At 41, Julia still turns heads, and she knows it. She's got the kind of sharp features that look good in business suits, and the kind of confidence that makes people believe whatever she's selling. "Oh, that," she said, waving a hand like she was swatting away a fly. "Monica thought it would be nice to invite a few people from work. You know, networking." Monica. Julia's assistant, who worships the ground Julia walks on and probably would have thrown herself in front of a bus if Julia asked nicely. Another detail that didn't add up. "Networking at your birthday party," I said. It wasn't a question. "Nathan, don't be paranoid. It's just a party." Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. There it was, the word that had become Julia's favorite weapon over the past 6 months. Paranoid. Like noticing your wife's behavior changes makes you crazy instead of observant. I stood up from the couch and walked over to her. Up close, I could see the guilt in her eyes, hiding behind that practiced smile she uses on difficult clients. "Julia, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. If Trent Sawyer shows up at your party, I'm walking out that door, and I won't be coming back." Her smile faltered for just a moment. Then it snapped back into place, brighter than before. "Don't be ridiculous, Nathan. You're being dramatic." "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're planning something special for your boss, and I'm betting it's not a handshake and a piece of cake." She turned away from me and started rifling through her dresser drawer, pulling out underwear I'd never seen before. Black lace, expensive looking. "I don't know what you think is going on, but you're wrong," she said, without looking at me. "Trent is married. He's a professional colleague, and frankly, I'm getting tired of your accusations. I haven't accused you of anything yet. Yet." She spun around, and now her mask was completely off. The Julia looking at me wasn't the woman I'd married 8 years ago. This Julia had cold eyes and a mouth that curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's the problem, Nathan. You're always waiting for me to do something wrong. Always watching, always suspicious. It's exhausting." I felt something shift inside my chest, like a gear clicking into place. For months, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. But looking at her face right now, I knew I'd been right all along. You know what's exhausting? I said. Pretending I don't notice when my wife starts acting like a stranger. Pretending I don't see the way you smile at your phone when you think I'm not looking. Pretending I believe your stories about working late when your car isn't in the office parking lot. Her face went white. Bingo. You been checking up on me? I've been trying to figure out why my wife doesn't want to be around me anymore. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. For a moment, she looked almost sad. Then the mask slid back into place. I think you should talk to someone, Nathan. This jealousy isn't healthy. And there it was, the final insult. Not only was she planning to humiliate me at her own birthday party, but she was trying to make me think I was losing my mind in the process. I walked to the closet and pulled out my jacket. Where are you going? She asked. To Pete's. I need to talk to someone who still remembers what honesty looks like. I was halfway to the door when she called after me. Nathan, wait. I stopped, but didn't turn around. The party is Saturday. I hope you'll be there. I looked back at her over my shoulder. She was standing in the bedroom doorway in her towel, and for just a second, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with. Then I remembered the app on her phone and the lies that came so easily to her lips. I'll be there, I said. But if Trent shows up, remember what I told you. She smiled that cold smile again. I'll keep that in mind. I drove to Pete's house thinking about that smile and about the way she'd said, I'll keep that in mind, instead of, he won't be there. Julia had made her choice. Now I was going to make mine. Pete Martinez lives in a duplex about 10 minutes from my house. He's been my best friend since high school, back when we both thought we'd conquer the world by the time we turned 30. Pete ended up as a mechanic with his own shop, and I ended up managing other people's construction projects. We didn't conquer the world, but we'd both built decent lives. At least, I thought I had. Pete was in his garage when I pulled up, bent over the engine of a Chevy that had seen better decades. He looked up when he heard my car door slam and wiped his hands on a rag that was probably dirtier than whatever he was cleaning off. You look like someone ran over your dog, he said. What's Julia done now? That's Pete for you. Straight to the point, no sugarcoating. It's one of the things I've always liked about him. She's invited her boss to her birthday party, the one I told you about. Pete straightened up and gave me a look that said he wasn't surprised. Trent, what's his name? The guy with the fancy car? That's the one. And you think they're... I know they are. Pete nodded slowly. He'd been married once, back in his 20s. His ex-wife had cheated on him with his best man 6 months after the wedding. Pete knows the signs. So, what are you going to do about it? I leaned against his workbench and watched him fiddle with a wrench. I warned her, told her if he shows up, I'm done. And she's going to invite him anyway. Pete set down his tools and really looked at me for the first time since I'd arrived. Nathan, you've been talking about this for months. At some point, you've got to stop talking and start doing. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're hoping she'll come to her senses and choose you over him. But that's not how this works, buddy. She's already made her choice. He was right, and I knew it. The Julia who cared about our marriage, who cared about me, wouldn't have put Trent's name on that guest list in the first place. The Julia I was dealing with now was someone else entirely. So what do you suggest? Pete grinned, and it wasn't a nice expression. I suggest you stop playing defense and start playing offense. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 8 years of marriage. I called in sick to work and followed my wife. Julia left the house at 7:30 sharp, same as always, coffee mug in one hand and phone in the other. She was wearing a blue dress I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, back when she still smiled at me like she meant it. I waited until she turned the corner, then got in my truck and followed at a distance. Morrison Marketing sits in one of those glass office buildings that all look the same, surrounded by a parking lot that's too small for the number of people who work there. I parked across the street and watched Julia walk into the building. Normal morning, normal routine. Maybe Pete was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then, at 9:15, Trent's red convertible pulled into the parking lot. I'd seen Trent exactly 3 times before today, but I'd remember that car anywhere. It's the kind of vehicle that screams, "Look at me," in a way that makes you want to look anywhere else. Trent climbed out wearing a suit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment and walked into the building like he owned it, which technically he did. Trent was a partner at Morrison Marketing, not just Julia's boss. He had money, power, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about either one. I sat in my truck for 2 hours, drinking gas station coffee and feeling like a private investigator in a bad movie. Nothing happened. People went in, people came out, life went on. I was about to give up and go home when I saw them, Julia and Trent, walking out of the building together. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his arm in a way that was definitely not professional. They got into his convertible and drove away. I followed them. They went to a restaurant called Martinelli's, one of those upscale Italian places where the portions are small and the prices are ridiculous. I parked down the street and watched them through the window. They were sitting close together, closer than any boss and employee should sit. Julia kept touching his hand across the table. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not anger exactly, more like resignation. For months, I'd been hoping I was wrong about Julia and Trent. Now I knew I wasn't, and the certainty was almost a relief. They stayed at the restaurant for an hour and a half. When they came out, Julia looked flushed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. Trent had his hand on the small of her back as he walked her to the car. They didn't go back to the office. Instead, Trent drove to the Riverside Inn, a motel on the outskirts of town that rents rooms by the hour. I watched from the parking lot of a gas station across the street as they went into room 237. I sat there for 45 minutes, staring at that door and thinking about the 8 years Julia and I had been married. The house we'd bought together, the vacations we'd taken, the plans we'd made for the future. All of it built on what I'd thought was solid ground, but apparently was nothing more than sand. When they came out, Julia's hair was messed up, and Trent was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. They got in his car and drove back toward town. I followed them as far as the office building, then went home. Julia got home at 6:30, same as always. She walked in the door with a smile on her face and a spring in her step that I hadn't seen in months. "Hi, honey," she said, kissing my cheek like nothing had happened. "How was your day?" "Fine," I said. "How was yours?" "Oh, you know, meetings, phone calls, the usual boring stuff." She went upstairs to change clothes, humming to herself. I stood in the kitchen, listening to her move around above me, and made a decision. Pete was right. Julia had already made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I spent the rest of the week planning. Not anything elaborate or complicated. I'm not a complicated man, and I didn't want a complicated revenge. I just wanted Julia to understand that actions have consequences. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Perfect weather for what was shaping up to be a miserable day. Julia had been bustling around the house since dawn, arranging flowers and setting up tables in the backyard. She'd hired a catering company and rented a tent, turning our modest suburban home into something that looked like a magazine spread. "This is quite a production," I said, watching her fuss with a centerpiece. "I only turned 41 once," she said without looking at me. "I want it to be special." Special. There was that word again. The guests started arriving at 2 o'clock. Julia's friends from work, a few neighbors, some people I recognized but couldn't name. Everyone was dressed up and carrying gifts, ready to celebrate another year of Julia's life. I played the part of the dutiful husband, greeting guests and making small talk about the weather. Inside, I was watching the door, waiting. At 2:30, Monica arrived with a gift bag and a nervous smile. She was a small woman in her 50s who always seemed to be apologizing for something. "Nathan, hi," she said, giving me a quick hug. "Beautiful party." "Julia did all the work," I said. "I just stayed out of the way." Monica laughed, but it sounded forced. She kept glancing around the yard, like she was looking for someone. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Oh, yes, fine. I hope everyone has a good time." She hurried away before I could ask what she meant by that, but I had a pretty good idea. At 3 o'clock, right on schedule, I saw the red convertible pull into my driveway. Trent Sawyer stepped out of his car like he was walking onto a red carpet. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's rent, and he carried a gift that was wrapped in silver paper with an elaborate bow. I watched him walk through my backyard gate, watched him scan the crowd until he spotted Julia, watched his face light up when she turned and saw him. "Trent!" she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm so glad you could make it." She practically ran across the yard to greet him, throwing her arms around his neck in a hug that lasted about 3 seconds too long. Several people turned to look, including Monica, who had gone pale. I walked into the house and went to the kitchen, where the birthday cake was waiting on the counter. It was a beautiful cake, 3 layers with white frosting and pink roses. Julia had special ordered it from the bakery downtown. I opened the drawer where we keep the pens and pulled out a black Sharpie. Then I walked over to the cake and wrote a message on the white frosting, right across the top in neat block letters. "Happy birthday, Julia. Enjoy your special guest." I capped the pen, put it back in the drawer, and walked outside. Julia was standing near the tent with Trent and a group of her work friends, laughing at something he'd said. She looked radiant, happier than I'd seen her in months. Trent had his hand on her shoulder, and she wasn't pulling away. I walked over to the group and cleared my throat. "Excuse me, everyone," I said. "I think it's time for cake." Julia's eyes met mine, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or guilt. "Already?" she said. "But we haven't even—" "Trust me," I said. "You're going to want to see this cake." I walked back to the house, and after a moment, the party followed me. Julia came last, with Trent right beside her. I carried the cake out to the backyard and set it on the main table. The conversations around the yard gradually died as people noticed the message I'd written. Julia stared at the cake for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and I saw her mask slip completely. The woman looking at me wasn't embarrassed or ashamed. She was angry. "Nathan," she said, her voice tight. "What is this?" "It's your birthday cake," I said. "I thought you'd want everyone to know how special today is." The yard had gone completely quiet. 40 people standing around in uncomfortable silence, pretending not to stare at the cake or the couple having a very public meltdown. Trent stepped forward, and I got my first good look at him up close. He was handsome in that generic way that comes from expensive haircuts and personal trainers, but his eyes were small and mean. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I'm just here as a friend and colleague." "Are you?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're here as something else entirely." Julia grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "Nathan, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." I looked around the yard at all the faces staring back at me. Some looked shocked, some looked uncomfortable, and a few looked like they were enjoying the show. Monica was standing near the back, and she looked like she wanted to disappear. "You know what's embarrassing, Julia?" I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Having your wife invite her lover to her birthday party and expecting you to serve him cake." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. Julia's face went through several different expressions in the space of about 5 seconds. Shock, anger, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like relief. "You're insane," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe, I said, but I'm not stupid. I looked at Trent, who was standing there like a deer in headlights, his smooth confidence finally cracking. Enjoy the party, I told him. Both of you. I walked back into the house, grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter, and headed for the front door. Behind me, I could hear voices starting up again, excited whispers and nervous laughter. I was almost to my truck when I heard footsteps behind me. Nathan, wait! I turned around. Julia was standing on the front porch, still in her party dress, her face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both. You can't just leave, she said. These are our friends, our neighbors. Your friends, I corrected. Your neighbors. Your party. Your choice. Nathan, please, come back inside, we can talk about this. I looked at her standing there, and for a moment, I almost wavered. This was Julia, the woman I'd married, the woman I'd loved for 8 years. Maybe we could work this out. Maybe we could find our way back to each other. Then I remembered the way she'd hugged Trent when he arrived, the way she'd touched his hand at the restaurant, the way she'd hummed while getting dressed after spending the afternoon in a motel room. There's nothing to talk about, I said. You made your choice when you put his name on the guest list. I got in my truck and drove away, leaving Julia standing on the porch and 40 guests, wondering what they were supposed to do with the rest of their Saturday afternoon. I drove to Pete's house and told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, then handed me a beer and shook his head. Well, he said, I guess that settles that. I guess it does. So what now? I took a long drink of beer and thought about Julia's face when she saw the cake, about the way Trent had tried to play innocent, about the 40 people who now knew exactly what kind of woman my wife really was. Now, I said, things get interesting. I didn't go home that night, or the next night. I stayed at Pete's, sleeping on his couch and trying to figure out what came next. Julia called 17 times on Sunday. I didn't answer. Monday morning, I went back to work, like nothing had happened. My boss, Gary, asked how Julia's party went. I told him it was memorable. He didn't press for details. At lunch, I drove by the house to pick up some clothes. Julia's car was in the driveway, which surprised me. She should have been at work. I used my key to let myself in, and I found her sitting at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red and puffy, and there were tissues scattered around her like fallen snow. Nathan, she said when she saw me. Thank God. I've been trying to call you. I know. I walked past her toward the stairs, but she stood up and blocked my path. We need to talk. No, we don't. Yes, we do. What you did on Saturday it was cruel, Nathan. Those people are my friends, my colleagues. You humiliated me in front of everyone I work with. I stopped and really looked at her. Even with red eyes and messy hair, Julia was still beautiful. But there was something different about her face, something hard that hadn't been there when we got married. I humiliated you? I said. Julia, you invited your lover to your birthday party. You hugged him in front of our neighbors. You let him put his hands on you in my backyard. But somehow I'm the one who humiliated you? She flinched, like I'd slapped her. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I followed you last Tuesday, Julia. I saw you go to Martinelli's with him. I saw you go to the Riverside Inn. Her face went white, then red, then white again. For a moment, she looked like she might faint. You followed me? I followed my wife, who was acting like a stranger and lying to my face every single day. She sat back down at the table and put her head in her hands. Nathan, I can explain. Can you? Because I'd love to hear how you explain spending the afternoon in a motel room with your boss. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally looked up, there were fresh tears on her cheeks, but her eyes had gone cold. You want the truth? She said. Fine. Yes, I'm having an affair with Trent. Yes, I've been lying to you. But do you want to know why? I waited. Because you're boring, Nathan. You're safe and predictable and boring, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of coming home to the same conversations about your construction projects and your friend Pete and what's for dinner. I'm tired of your jokes that aren't funny and your Saturday morning routine that never changes. I'm tired of being married to someone who thinks the height of excitement is trying a new restaurant. Each word hit like a physical blow. I'd known she was cheating, but I hadn't known she hated me. So why not just ask for a divorce? I said. Why sneak around? Why lie? She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Because I'm not stupid, Nathan. Do you have any idea what a divorce would cost me? Half the house, half your pension, half of everything we've built together. And for what? So I could start over at 41 with nothing? So you thought you'd just keep me around as a safety net while you had your fun with Trent. Something like that. The casual way she said it, like she was discussing the weather, made something snap inside my chest. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This wasn't even someone I recognized. Well, I said, I guess that plan didn't work out. No, it didn't, thanks to you and your little stunt on Saturday. My little stunt? Julia, you brought your lover to your birthday party. What did you think was going to happen? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where we'd hosted dozens of parties over the years. Normal parties with normal guests, back when we were normal people. I thought you'd be too much of a coward to do anything about it, she said without turning around. And there it was, the truth finally. Julia hadn't just been cheating on me. She'd been counting on me being too weak to fight back. You thought wrong, I said. She turned around, and now she looked more like the old Julia, the one who could charm clients and close deals and make people believe whatever she wanted them to believe. Nathan, listen to me. We can fix this. What happened on Saturday it was a mistake. I made some bad choices. But we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can start over. Can we? What about Trent? What about him? Are you going to stop seeing him? She hesitated for just a moment, but it was long enough. Julia? It's complicated. No, it's not. Either you stop seeing him or you don't. Which is it? Another hesitation. Longer this time. I can't just... Nathan, you don't understand. My job, my career, it's all tied up with Trent. If I just cut things off, it could ruin everything I've worked for. I stared at her. Are you telling me that you won't stop seeing him because it might hurt your career? I'm telling you that it's not as simple as you're making it sound. It sounds pretty simple to me. You're choosing him over me. Again. That's not what I'm doing. Then prove it. Call him right now and tell him it's over. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options, calculating the costs and benefits like she was putting together a marketing proposal. I need time to think, she said finally. How much time? I don't know. A few weeks, maybe. I need to figure out how to handle things at work. I walked toward the stairs. I'll be back for the rest of my clothes tomorrow. Nathan, wait. Where are you going to stay? Pete's. For how long? I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at her. She was standing in the kitchen of the house we'd bought together, wearing the bathrobe I'd given her last Christmas, and she looked like a stranger. Until you decide what's more important to you, I said. Your marriage or your career? I went upstairs and packed a bag with enough clothes to last a week. When I came back down, Julia was sitting at the table again, staring at her phone. Julia? She looked up. For what it's worth, I really did love you. The real you, not whatever this is. She started crying again, but I didn't stay to comfort her. That wasn't my job anymore. I drove back to Pete's and told him about the conversation. He listened, shaking his head. She actually said you were boring? Among other things. And she won't give up the other guy? She says it's complicated. Pete snorted. It's only complicated if you make it complicated. She's choosing him over you, buddy. Time to accept it and move on. I know. Do you? Because you're talking like maybe you're going to take her back if she comes to her senses. I thought about that. Was I? Part of me wanted to believe that the Julia I'd married was still in there somewhere, buried under 8 years of disappointment and resentment. But the woman I'd talked to today wasn't that person. Maybe she never had been. No, I said, I'm not taking her back. Good, so what's the plan? I smiled, and it felt good to smile for the first time in days. I'm going to make sure she understands exactly what she's giving up. Pete grinned back. Now you're talking. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Hendricks, and Pete had recommended her after his own divorce. She had an office in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service, but her reputation was solid. Mr. Forrester, she said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. Pete told me you might be calling. Have a seat. Patricia was about 60, with gray hair pulled back in a bun, and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that comes from dealing with cheating spouses and messy divorces for 30 years. I liked her immediately. Tell me what's going on, she said. I told her everything. The affair, the birthday party, Julia's refusal to end things with Trent. Patricia took notes and nodded at all the right places. Do you have any evidence of the affair? She asked. I saw them together. I followed them to a motel. Did you take pictures? No. Pity, but not fatal. Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, so we don't need to prove adultery to get you divorced. However, evidence of an affair can be useful in property division and spousal support discussions. Spousal support? Patricia smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. Your wife makes more money than you do, correct? About $20,000 a year more. Then there's a chance you could be entitled to spousal support from her, especially if we can show that her affair contributed to the breakdown of the marriage. I hadn't thought about that. The idea of Julia having to pay me alimony was almost funny. What's my next step? I asked. Go home and document everything. Financial records, bank statements, evidence of her spending patterns. If she's using marital funds to finance her affair, we need to know about it. And Mr. Forrester? Yes? Don't do anything stupid. No confronting the boyfriend, no dramatic gestures, no social media posts. Keep your hands clean and let me handle the legal side. I promised to behave myself and left her office feeling better than I had in weeks. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had a plan. That afternoon, I went back to the house to get more clothes and look through our financial records. Julia's car wasn't in the driveway, which was fine with me. I wasn't ready for another conversation like the one we'd had yesterday. I let myself in and went straight to the home office we'd set up in the spare bedroom. Julia handled most of our finances, which had seemed like a good division of labor when we were happily married. Now I was wondering what else I didn't know about our life together. I spent 2 hours going through bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts. What I found made my stomach turn. Over the past 6 months, Julia had spent almost $4,000 at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never stayed at, and stores that sold the kind of lingerie she definitely wasn't wearing for me. She'd been financing her affair with our joint checking account, and I'd been too trusting to notice. I made copies of everything and put them in a folder to give to Patricia. Then I went upstairs to pack more clothes. I was in the bedroom when I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I could see Julia getting out of her sedan. She wasn't alone. Trent Sawyer climbed out of the passenger seat and followed Julia toward the front door. He was carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of smug expression that made me want to punch something. They were coming into my house, together, like I didn't exist. I heard the front door open and their voices in the hallway below. Julia was laughing at something Trent had said. They sounded relaxed, comfortable, like they belonged here. I finished packing my bag and started toward the stairs. I could hear them in the kitchen now, opening the wine, making themselves at home. In my house, with my furniture and my dishes, and my life. I walked downstairs and found them sitting at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of red wine. Julia looked up when she saw me, and her face went pale. "Nathan," she said, "I didn't know you were here." Obviously. Trent stood up and extended his hand like we were meeting at a business conference. "Nathan, good to see you again. I hope you don't mind me stopping by." I looked at his outstretched hand, but didn't shake it. "Actually, I do mind. This is my house." Of course. Julia just wanted to discuss some work issues, and it seemed easier to do it here than at the office. "Work issues," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Julia stood up and moved between us. "Nathan, please don't make this more difficult than it has to be." "Difficult? You brought your boyfriend into our house, and I'm making things difficult?" "He's not my boyfriend." "What is he then?" She glanced at Trent, who was standing there with his wine glass like he was watching an interesting movie. It's complicated." "So you keep saying." I looked at Trent, who was still holding his wine glass and trying to look casual. Up close, he was smaller than I'd expected. Not short, but soft. The kind of man who'd probably never been in a real fight in his life. "Trent," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you planning to leave your wife for Julia?" His face went red. "I don't think that's any of your business." "It's my business when you're in my kitchen drinking my wine with my wife." "Nathan," Julia said, "stop." "No, I want to hear this. Trent, you and Julia are having an affair. You're both married to other people. What's the end game here?" Trent set down his wine glass and straightened his shoulders, trying to look more intimidating than he actually was. "Look, Nathan, I understand you're upset, but Julia and I have a connection that goes beyond whatever you and she had. We're planning a future together." "Are you? Julia, is that true?" She looked back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. "We've talked about it." "Talked about what exactly? Getting divorced? Getting married? Moving in together? What?" "We've talked about possibilities." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Here was my wife, sitting in our kitchen with her lover, and she couldn't even commit to a plan for their future together. "Possibilities," I said. "That's perfect. Julia, do you hear yourself? This man is asking you to give up your marriage for possibilities." "It's more than that," Trent said. "We love each other." "Do you? Trent, when are you planning to tell your wife about this love?" His face got redder. We're working on the timing." "I see. And Julia, when did you fall in love with Trent? Before or after you realized he could help your career?" "That's not fair," she said. "Isn't it? You told me yesterday that your job was tied up with Trent, that you couldn't just end things because it might hurt your career. That doesn't sound like love to me. That sounds like a business arrangement." I picked up my bag and headed for the door. "Enjoy your wine, both of you. But next time, maybe you should meet at his house. Or better yet, at the Riverside Inn. I hear room 237 is nice this time of year." I left them sitting in the kitchen and drove back to Pete's. That evening, Julia called 6 times. I didn't answer. The next morning, I met with Patricia again and gave her copies of all the financial records I'd found. She looked through them with the kind of professional interest that comes from seeing this same story played out hundreds of times. "This is good," she said. "Very good. She's been using marital funds to finance her affair, which gives us leverage in property division. How do you want to proceed?" "I want to file for divorce." "Are you sure? Sometimes it's worth waiting to see if the other party will file first. It can be strategically advantageous." I thought about Julia and Trent sitting in my kitchen, drinking wine and making plans for their future together while I was upstairs packing my clothes. "I'm sure," I said. "File the papers." Patricia smiled. "I'll have them ready by tomorrow." That afternoon, I went back to work and tried to focus on normal things, budgets and schedules and contractors who promised more than they could deliver. It felt good to think about problems that could actually be solved. At 5 o'clock, my phone rang. Julia. Nathan, we need to talk. No, we don't. Yes, we do. I've made a decision. Despite everything, I felt a small flutter of hope. What kind of decision? I'm choosing you. I'm ending things with Trent. I sat in my truck in the office parking lot, listening to my wife tell me she'd decided to stay married to me, and I felt nothing. No relief, no happiness, no gratitude, just emptiness. When? I asked. I already did. I called him this morning and told him it was over. And he was okay with that? He understood. We both realized that what we had was just a midlife crisis, a mistake. A 6-month mistake that you financed with our joint checking account. Silence. Julia? I know you're angry about the money. I can pay it back. It's not about the money. Then what is it about? I thought about how to answer that. How do you explain to someone that they've broken something that can't be fixed? How do you tell your wife that you don't love her anymore? It's about trust, I said finally. It's about respect. It's about the fact that you brought him into our house yesterday and introduced him as your future. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. And now you do? Yes. I want my marriage. I want you. Why? Because I love you. No, you don't. You told me yourself that I'm boring and predictable. You said you were tired of being married to me. I was angry. I didn't mean it. Yes, you did. And you know what, Julia? You were right. I am boring. I am predictable. I'm the kind of man who goes to work every day and pays his bills and tries to be a good husband. I'm the kind of man who thinks marriage vows mean something. Nathan, please, come home. We can work this out. I am coming home, tomorrow afternoon, but not to work things out. What do you mean? I mean, I'm coming home to serve you with divorce papers. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Nathan? What? I'm pregnant. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat in my truck, staring at the dashboard, trying to process what she'd just said. How pregnant? 8 weeks. I did the math in my head. 8 weeks ago, Julia and I were still sleeping in the same bed, still pretending we had a marriage worth saving. Is it mine? Another long silence. Julia? Is it mine? I don't know. And there it was. The final insult. My wife was pregnant, and she didn't know if the baby was mine or her lover's. Well, I said, I guess we'll figure that out later. Nathan, wait. This changes things. No, it doesn't. We're going to have a baby. Maybe. Maybe you're going to have a baby. Maybe Trent is, but I'm still filing for divorce tomorrow. I hung up and sat in the parking lot for a long time, watching people leave work and drive home to their families. Normal people with normal problems and normal lives. My phone rang again, but I didn't answer it. I drove to Pete's house and told him about Julia's phone call. All of it. She's pregnant, he said. Maybe. And it might not be yours? Might not be. Pete shook his head. Nathan, I've seen some messed up situations in my time, but this takes the cake. Yeah. So what are you going to do? I looked at my best friend, sitting in his garage with a beer in his hand and grease under his fingernails, and I realized that he was probably the most honest person I knew. I'm going to file for divorce, I said, and then I'm going to start over. Good, Pete said. It's about time. The next morning, Patricia called to tell me the divorce papers were ready. I picked them up at her office and drove to the house one last time. Julia's car was in the driveway, along with a red convertible that I recognized. I sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the house where I'd lived for 8 years. It was a nice house in a nice neighborhood, the kind of place where people raised families and built lives together. I'd thought Julia and I would grow old here. I'd thought we'd be different from all the other couples who started out happy and ended up hating each other. I'd been wrong about a lot of things. I walked to the front door and let myself in. Julia was sitting on the couch in the living room, and Trent was sitting beside her with his arm around her shoulders. "Nathan," Julia said, standing up. "I'm glad you're here. We need to talk." "No, we don't." I handed her the divorce papers. "We need to do this." She took the papers and looked at them like they were written in a foreign language. "Nathan, please, I told you I'm pregnant." "I heard you." "Doesn't that change anything?" I looked at her sitting on our couch with her lover's arm around her, holding divorce papers in one hand and probably carrying another man's baby, and I felt something that might have been pity. "No," I said. "It doesn't change anything." I walked back to my truck and drove away from the house for the last time, leaving Julia and Trent to figure out their future together. It was over. Finally, completely, irreversibly over.